Hollow ticking. The silence in the workshop was not a lack of sound, but a heavy, suffocating weight. Theron sat hunched over his workbench, the only light coming from a flickering tallow candle that cast dancing, skeletal shadows against the walls. Thousands of clocks lined the room, their pendulums stilled like frozen heartbeats. Theron's fingers, stained with grease and dried salt from tears, trembled as he held a tiny, jagged brass gear. He wasn't just repairing time, he was trying to tear it open. On the corner of the desk sat a silver locket, its hinge snapped. Inside was a portrait of Elara, her smile wide and her eyes full of a light that had been extinguished a year ago on the jagged rocks below the cliffs. Theron's grief had become a living thing, a rot that started in his chest and moved to his hands. He whispered her name into the gears, a prayer to a god of copper and rust, believing that if he could build the perfect sequence, he could wind the world backward. In the center of the room stood his masterpiece, the Kronos engine. It was a terrifying construct of obsidian and gold, towering over him like a tombstone. It didn't look like a clock. It looked like a ribcage. Theron fed the last gear into its gullet. The air in the room grew unnaturally cold, and the smell of ozone and old, wet earth began to rise from the floorboards. He reached for the heavy iron crank, his breath hitching in his throat. With a final agonizing surge of strength, Theron's fingers caught the lever and slammed it down. The engine shrieked, a sound of dying stars. The rift imploded, pulling the shadows, the clocks, and the girl back into the dark heart of the obsidian ribs. Silence returned to the workshop, deeper than before. Theron lay on the floor, alone in the wreckage of his life. The silver locket lay beside him, crushed flat. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness, he could still hear it, a single hollow tick. From the darkness, a hand emerged. It was pale, thin, and moved with a terrifying, jerky precision. Then came the crown of a head, followed by a face that looked like Alara's, yet was subtly, horribly wrong. Her skin was the color of parchment, and her eyes were not eyes at all, but two bottomless pits of swirling gray smoke. She stepped out of the rift, her feet silent on the wooden floor. Theron fell to his knees, his vision blurring. "Father," the thing said. The voice sounded like Alara's, but it was layered with 1,000 other whispers, a chorus of the drowned and the forgotten. She reached out and touched his forehead. Her fingers were not skin, they were cold, hard metal disguised as flesh. Theron shivered, a primal instinct screaming at him to run, but his love held him paralyzed. He watched as the shadows in the room began to stretch toward her, feeding into her hem like ink into a blotter. As Alara moved closer, the workshop began to change. The wood of the floorboards curled and blackened. The stilled clocks began to tick, but they ticked backward, a frantic, cacophonous sound that echoed the beating of a panicked heart. Theron realized then that she hadn't come back from the past. Something else had used the door he opened, something that wore his daughter's memory like a shroud. He tried to stand, but his limbs felt heavy, as if his own blood were turning to lead. "I was so cold. Father," the entity hissed, its jaw unhinging further than a human's ever could. The skin on its face began to crack, revealing shimmering rhythmic gears beneath the surface. It wasn't a soul, it was a mechanical mimicry of life, fueled by his own despair. It leaned in, its breath smelling of stagnant salt water and ancient grease. The room was dissolving into the void of the rift, the walls peeling away into nothingness. Theron lunged for the Kronos engine, his fingers searching for the release lever. He had to break the cycle. He had to kill her again. But Alara was faster, her hand clamped around his throat with the strength of a hydraulic press. He looked into those smoky pits and saw not his daughter, but a vast, empty ocean waiting to swallow him whole. "We can stay here forever," she whispered, in the second before the end. With a final agonizing surge of strength, Theron's fingers caught the lever and slammed it down. The engine shrieked, a sound of dying stars. The rift imploded, pulling the shadows, the clocks, and the girl back into the dark heart of the obsidian ribs. Silence returned to the workshop, deeper than before. Theron lay on the floor, alone in the wreckage of his life. The silver locket lay beside him, crushed flat. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness, he could still hear it, a single hollow tick.